Chapter 1. The sun was sinking low behind the Montana hills, painting the sky in streaks of fire and gold as the wind whispered through the tall grass. The ranch stretched endlessly, a world of silence and shadow. Jack Randall, a rugged rancher with eyes hardened by years of storms, rode slowly toward the barn, his horse's hooves echoing against the dry earth. But tonight, something felt different. The air was thick, heavy with the kind of stillness that makes the skin crawl. As he swung off his saddle, a distant cry pierced the calm, faint, desperate. Human froze. That wasn't the cry of a coyote, it was a child. Without hesitation, he grabbed his lantern and shotgun, sprinting toward the sound. The cries grew clearer as he neared the old creek bed. Two voices now, frightened, trembling. He found them huddled beneath a fallen log. A boy no older than 10 clutching his little sister who couldn't have been more than 6. Their clothes were torn, their faces smeared with mud and fear. "Please, sir," the boy gasped. "They're coming back." Jack knelt beside them, heart pounding. "Who's coming, son?" he asked, scanning the trees. The boy shook his head, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I don't know, they took our mama, please don't let them get us too." Jack didn't need to ask more. He could hear it now, the crunch of boots, the murmur of rough voices in the dark. Bandits, he thought. Maybe cattle thieves, maybe worse. He pulled the children close, whispering, "All of you stay behind me." The boy's fingers clung to Jack's coat as the little girl buried her face against his back, trembling. Jack raised his shotgun, eyes narrowing as 3 shadowed figures emerged from the trees, rifles glinting under the lantern light. Well, one of them sneered, "Looks like we've got company." Jack stepped forward, his voice cold and steady. "You boys picked the wrong ranch to come crawling to." The tallest one laughed, a cruel, metallic sound. "That's where you're wrong, old man. Those 2 brats belong to us now. Move aside or you'll join their ma." Jack's blood ran cold. He could see it in their eyes. These weren't men, they were predators. "You'll have to go through me first," he growled, and with a calm that only came from a life of hardship, he fired. The blast shattered the silence, scattering birds into the burning sky. The men dove for cover, bullets tearing through branches and dust. Jack pushed the children behind the old water trough, yelling, "Stay down, no matter what." The firefight raged under the dying light. Jack's every move fueled not by anger but by something deeper. A fierce, protective instinct he didn't even know he still had. One of the outlaws fell, clutching his shoulder, cursing. Another tried to flank him, but Jack anticipated it, his aim steady as ever. When the final shot echoed into silence, all that remained was the sound of the wind and the children's quiet sobs. Jack knelt beside them again. "It's over now," he said softly, lowering his weapon. The boy looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "You saved us." Jack gave a tired smile. "You're safe here now. Nobody's gonna touch you." That night, as the ranch settled into uneasy peace, Jack sat by the fire, the 2 children asleep beside him, wrapped in a warm blanket. He studied their faces in the flickering light, wondering what kind of evil they'd seen. Somewhere deep in his chest, something shifted. A memory of his own daughter, long gone, lost to a fever years ago. Maybe that's why he couldn't leave them there. Maybe fate had sent them to his doorstep to remind him that even the hardest hearts still have room to protect, to love, to stand tall when others can't. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of the men's horses fleeing into the dark. But inside, under the dim glow of the lantern, a quiet promise was made, that this ranch, his ranch, would be their home now. Chapter 2. The morning dawned cold and silver. Mist rose from the fields as the first rays of light touched the earth. Jack was already awake, leaning against the fence, watching the horizon. Behind him, the children were still asleep inside the cabin. But as he stood there, his mind churned. The men from last night, they wouldn't stop. Outlaws like that never did. They'd be back, and this time they'd come for revenge. He couldn't let that happen. By the time the children stirred, breakfast was already cooking. Eggs sizzling, coffee boiling on the stove. The boy Samuel blinked sleepily. "Mister, what do we do now?" Jack turned, giving him a small nod. "We keep going, we stay strong, and we don't let fear decide who we are." Over the next few days, the ranch became a world of safety for the 2 children. Little Mary chased the chickens, her laughter like music Jack hadn't heard in years. Samuel helped mend fences, learning to ride, to work, to smile again. But in the quiet hours, Jack could see the fear still lingered in their eyes. They woke some nights screaming, dreaming of their mother's capture. Each time Jack would sit by their bedside, whispering the same words, "You're safe now. I'm here. Stay behind me." But safety never lasted long in those wild days. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky again, the ranch dog started barking. Jack's hand went instantly to his rifle. He looked toward the ridge, and his heart sank. 5 riders, dark silhouettes against the fire-red sky, were approaching fast. He turned to the children, his voice calm but firm. "Get inside the barn, don't come out till I say." Samuel hesitated, fear flashing in his eyes. "But, sir," Jack cut him off, crouching to meet his gaze. "Listen to me, boy. There are moments in life when running isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Protect your sister. That's your job now." As they ran to hide, Jack stood tall in the fading light, loading his rifle, every muscle steady. The riders closed in, their laughter cruel and echoing across the fields. When they stopped at the gate, their leader spat onto the dirt. "You should have minded your own business, old man." Jack's eyes narrowed. "These kids are my business now." The standoff stretched, the air so tense it felt like time itself had stopped. Then came the first gunshot, wild, reckless. Jack ducked behind a hay cart, returning fire, every shot precise. The barn door creaked as the children peered out, terrified. "Stay behind me," Jack shouted again, his voice carrying across the field. The children huddled low, clutching each other, as bullets sparked off the fences and dust filled the air. But Jack was relentless. One by one the outlaws fell, until the last man, their leader, dropped his gun, his voice trembling. You're crazy. Jack stepped forward, leveling his rifle. No, I'm a man who's lost enough. The outlaw turned and fled into the dusk. Silence returned. Jack dropped to his knees, breathing hard. The children ran to him, their small arms wrapping around his waist. He smiled through the exhaustion, laying a hand on each of their heads. It's over now, he whispered, though deep down he knew it wasn't just the fight that had ended. It was his loneliness too. From that day Samuel and Mary stayed on the ranch. They became his family, his purpose, his reason to live again. Jack taught them to ride, to harvest, to stand tall, to face storms not with fear but with courage. And every time the wind howled through the valley, Mary would cling to his coat and whisper, "We're safe with you, right?" And Jack, with that same steady voice, would always say, "As long as I'm here, you'll never have to be afraid again." The story of that night spread through the valley, told around fires and in quiet whispers, of a rancher who stood between evil and innocence, who fought not for glory but for love. Shr3 The weeks that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. The days stretched long under the wide Montana sky, and the nights were filled with the hum of crickets and the soft creak of the old wooden porch. Jack Randall had started to believe that the danger was over, that maybe, finally, the ranch had found peace again. Samuel and Mary were smiling more these days. Samuel helped Jack fix fences and feed the horses, and little Mary spent her time in the garden, naming the wildflowers after angels. For the first time in years Jack felt something he thought he'd lost forever, family. But peace, as Jack knew all too well, never lasted long in a world like theirs. Trouble had a way of finding good people, especially those who stood up for what was right. One cold evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and painted the world in soft orange light, a rider appeared on the ridge. Jack noticed him first, a lone silhouette, motionless, watching. A chill crept through Jack's veins. He set down his tools, his jaw tightening. "Sam," he said quietly, "take your sister inside." The boy turned, sensing the shift in Jack's voice. "Is it them again?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. Jack grabbed his rifle from the porch and walked slowly toward the open field, boots crunching against the gravel. The figure on the ridge started to ride down, steady, deliberate. When he came close enough, Jack could see his face, scarred man with a cold smirk, one eye clouded white from an old wound. "You must be the rancher they call Randall," the stranger said, dismounting. His voice was low, venomous. "You took something that didn't belong to you." Jack's grip on the rifle tightened. "If you're talking about those children, they don't belong to anyone. Their mother's gone, and I won't let any man use them for whatever filthy game you're playing." The man chuckled darkly. "You think you're a hero? You killed my brother that night. You think I'd let that go?" Jack's stomach sank. He remembered the one outlaw who hadn't made it out alive, the one who'd fired first, the one who'd nearly hit Samuel. So this was about revenge. "You bring war to my land," Jack said slowly, "and I'll finish what your brother started." The man's smirk faded. "Then you best be ready." He mounted his horse again and looked down at Jack. 3 days. That's all you've got. When I return, I'll burn this place to the ground, and everyone in it." Jack didn't flinch. He watched the man ride off into the dying light until the sound of hooves faded into the hills. Then he turned toward the house, his heart heavy with what he knew was coming. That night after dinner he gathered Samuel and Mary by the fire. The flames flickered across their innocent faces and Jack struggled to find the right words. "Kids," he said softly, "sometimes doing what's right means standing against the wrong. No matter the cost, I won't lie to you, bad men are coming again. But I need you to be brave." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "Will they hurt us?" she whispered. Jack pulled her close, brushing a hand through her hair. "Not while I'm breathing," he said. "Not ever." Samuel clenched his fists. "I can help you fight." Jack smiled faintly. "No son, you help by protecting your sister. Promise me you'll take her to the barn and stay hidden if anything happens." Samuel hesitated but nodded. "I promise." For the next 3 days, Jack prepared. He reinforced the fences, repaired the barn doors, set traps along the main trail, and kept watch at night. He barely slept, running on grit and determination alone. The sky stayed gray, heavy with storm clouds, as if the land itself knew what was coming. On the third evening, thunder rolled across the plains, the wind howled, whipping dust into the air. Jack stood on the porch, rifle in hand, lantern flickering beside him. Samuel and Mary peeked out from the window, faces pale. The storm was coming, and not just from the sky. In the distance, the sound of horses echoed again, this time more than one. Jack counted 6 riders, torches burning like evil stars against the dark. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "All of you stay behind me," he muttered under his breath. The same words that had saved them once before. The riders circled the house like vultures. Their leader, the scarred man, shouted through the storm. "You had your chance, old man. This is the end." Jack stepped out from the porch, rain pelting his face, and raised his rifle. "You're right," he said. "It ends tonight." Lightning flashed, illuminating the battlefield. The fight began. Gunfire cracking through the thunder, flames flickering as torches hit the ground. Jack fought like a man possessed, his every move deliberate, his every shot counted. He wasn't fighting for himself, he was fighting for those 2 small souls hiding behind him. The battle raged across the ranch. One outlaw fell near the well, another by the barn. But Jack was bleeding now. A bullet grazed his arm, another tore through his side. Still he stood tall. Samuel peeked out from the barn door, wanting to run to him, but Jack's voice thundered through the storm. "Stay back! Stay behind me." Then came the scarred man, charging through the rain, his pistol drawn. "You should have stayed out of it, Randall," he yelled. Jack fired. But his gun jammed. The outlaw grinned, raising his weapon. In that split second something moved Samuel, sprinting through the rain shouting, "Leave him alone." He tackled the outlaw's arm, the gun firing wild. Jack seized the moment, slamming the man to the ground and disarming him with a brutal strike. When the storm finally broke, silence fell again. The outlaws were gone, some dead, others fleeing into the darkness. Jack stood there, drenched, breathing hard. Samuel and Mary ran to him, hugging him tightly. "You told us to stay behind you," Samuel said through tears. "But I couldn't just watch you fall." Jack smiled weakly, his voice trembling. "And that's how I know you'll be just fine, son. You've got the heart of a man who stands for others." The storm clouds drifted away, revealing the first light of dawn. The ranch was scared, but it still stood, and so did they. That morning, as the sun rose again over the Montana hills, Jack sat on the porch, his arm bandaged, the children beside him. The danger had passed, but something beautiful had been born in its place. A bond stronger than blood. Family wasn't about where you came from, he thought. It was about who you stood beside when the world turned dark. He looked at Samuel and Mary and said softly, "You two are my family now, and no storm, no man will ever take that away." Sheep to Arth. The next morning dawned calm, too calm. The air smelled of wet soil and gunpowder. The sky stretched wide and pale over the wounded land. Smoke still curled from the burned edge of the fence, and the earth was scattered with the remains of last night's battle. But within that quiet ruin, there was something new, a fragile peace. Jack Randall sat on the porch steps, his arm bandaged, a cup of coffee trembling slightly in his hand. His body ached, but his heart felt heavier than any wood could make it. He looked out toward the barn where Samuel and Mary were feeding the horses, their laughter faint but real. That sound, that innocent laughter, made every bullet, every scar, worth it. For a moment, Jack let his eyes close. He remembered the war, years ago, long before these children had entered his life. He'd been a soldier once, a man who knew what it meant to lose everything. His wife Clara had waited for him every night by the porch light. But one winter, she fell ill, and by the time Jack returned home she was gone. He'd buried her under the big oak near the creek and promised himself he'd never get close to anyone again. Because when you love people you give the world something to take away. That was the lesson he'd lived by. Until Samuel and Mary appeared out of the shadows that night. They had broken down the walls he'd spent years building. And now, looking at them, Jack realized that life had quietly given him back something he never thought he'd feel again. A reason to live. Later that afternoon the sheriff came riding up the trail with 2 deputies. He was a gruff man with a sharp eye, the kind who measured truth by how a man stood when he spoke. "Heard you had trouble out here, Randall," the sheriff said, dismounting. "We found 3 bodies by the river road. You got any idea who they were?" Jack nodded slowly. "Outlaws. They came for the children. I did what I had to." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. "You've always been a man of few words. Guess I don't need more than that." Then his eyes softened as he glanced toward the kids playing near the barn. "What about them?" Jack looked at them, Samuel teaching Mary how to throw feed, both laughing like they'd never known fear. "They've got no one," Jack said quietly. "No mother, no father, no place to go." The sheriff nodded. "I can find a home for them in town if you'd like." Jack's gaze hardened. "They're already home." The sheriff gave a faint smile, tipping his hat. "Didn't think you had it in you, Randall. Gus, people can surprise you." When the lawman rode off, Jack walked back toward the barn. Samuel saw him coming and ran over, grinning wide. "Mr. Jack, look, Mary's not scared of the horses anymore." Mary beamed proudly, clutching the bridle like a trophy. Jack chuckled, a sound rough and rare. "That's because she's got courage," he said, "same as her brother." For days afterward, life slowly returned to normal. The smell of gunpowder faded, replaced by the scent of hay and rain. Jack taught Samuel how to mend saddles, how to ride properly, how to aim a rifle. Not for violence but for survival. "The world ain't always kind," Jack told him one morning. "But kindness is what makes you stronger. You remember that?" Samuel nodded, taking every word like scripture. Mary followed Jack everywhere, to the fields, to the creek, even to the old oak where Clara was buried. One afternoon, she stood before the grave, her small voice trembling. "Is this your wife?" she asked softly. Jack nodded. "She was a good woman, strong, brave, you'd have liked her." Mary looked up at him, eyes wide with innocence. "Do you think she'd like us too?" Jack swallowed the lump in his throat. "She already does, sweetheart. She's watching over all of us." That night the 3 of them sat by the fire. The cabin glowed with warmth, the storm scars of the past week now just memories. Samuel leaned against the wall, Mary curled up on Jack's lap half asleep. The flames danced in their eyes, casting golden light across their faces. "Jack," Samuel said quietly, "what happens now?" Jack stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "Now we live, we build, we take care of each other. The world's full of bad men, Sam, but it's also full of good ones. You've got to decide which one you'll be." Samuel nodded, his young face set with determination. "I'll be like you." Jack smiled faintly. "No, son, be better than me." Outside the wind blew gently through the fields, whispering through the broken fence posts and the hills beyond. The land that had once been filled with loneliness now pulsed with life. Jack had lost much in his time, his family, his peace, his hope, but somehow, through 2 frightened children and a storm of fire, he'd found it all again. Years later, that story would become legend in the valley. People would tell of the rancher who stood against 6 outlaws to protect 2 children who weren't even his own. Some called him a hero. Others said he was just a stubborn old man who refused to back down. But those who knew him, truly knew him, said he was something more, a man who proved that love can be reborn, even in the ashes of loss. And on quiet evenings, when the sun dipped low and the wind carried the scent of rain across the ranch, the locals swore you could still hear his voice echo faintly through the fields. All of you stay behind me. Not as a warning anymore, but as a promise that someone, somewhere, will always stand between darkness and the innocent. 5 years passed. The wind that once howled across Randall Ranch now sang softly through fields of golden wheat. The scars of battle were gone, the fences were strong, the barn stood taller, and life had settled into a rhythm of peace. The ranch that once echoed with fear and gunfire now echoed with laughter. The laughter of grown voices, of memory, and of love carried forward. Samuel Randall, no longer the frightened boy hiding behind a rancher's coat, now stood as a man in his late 20s, tall, broad-shouldered, and steady-eyed. The same steadiness Jack once had, his hands, rough from years of hard work, carried the same strength and gentleness that the old man had taught him. Mary was no longer the shy little girl who hid behind her brother. She had grown into a young woman full of grace, with the same quiet fire that once burned in Jack's late wife, Clara. The ranch was theirs now, their home, their legacy, their promise to the man who had saved them. On a bright morning in early summer, Samuel stood by the old oak near the creek. The same oak where Jack had buried his wife and where, years later, they had laid Jack himself to rest. The wooden cross still stood tall, carved by Samuel's own hands. He brushed his fingers over the letters burned to the wood. Jaki right all. Amam or fas o fars. A breeze swept through the trees, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and old memories. Mary walked up behind him holding 2 tin cups of coffee. You miss him today, she said softly, handing him one. Samuel nodded, eyes distant. Every day, he taught us everything we know. How to fight. How to work, how to be. Mary smiled sadly. He taught us how to love too. They both stood in silence, the creek murmuring gently nearby. Then Samuel spoke again. You know what I remember most? The night he told me to stay behind him. I thought he was just protecting us, but now I get it. Mary tilted her head. What do you mean? He wasn't just standing in front of danger. He was showing us how to stand for others one day. That's what those words meant. Mary looked at her brother, eyes glistening. And you did, Sam. You became just like him. Samuel took a deep breath, looking toward the horizon where the sun climbed over the hills. Maybe, he said quietly. But I still hear his voice sometimes. When I'm out in the fields, fixing fences, or when the storms roll in. I hear him say it again, all of you stay behind me. It's like he's still here watching. Mary smiled through her tears. Maybe he is. That evening, the ranch came alive with warmth and light. Neighbors gathered, families, workers and friends, to celebrate the 5th year of the Randall home for orphaned children. A small house Samuel had built at the far end of the property. It was Jack's dream carried forward by the 2 souls he'd once saved. Now, children played where there had once been gunfire. Their laughter rose into the sunset like music, echoing through the valley. Samuel stood on the porch as the sun dipped low, watching them. A young boy ran up, his face smudged with dirt but his smile bright. Mr. Randall, he called. Can you show me how to ride a horse like you do? Samuel laughed and knelt down, ruffling the boy's hair. You're not ready for that yet, son, but one day you will be. You just have to learn to stand tall first. The boy nodded proudly. Will you teach me? Samuel looked at him for a long moment and the past seemed to whisper through the air. Jack's voice, calm and sure, echoing in his heart. He smiled. I will, but promise me something. When someone smaller or weaker stands behind you, you protect them. Always. The boy blinked up at him, puzzled. Like you do. Samuel's voice softened. Exactly like that. As the boy ran off toward the barn, Mary stepped onto the porch beside him, holding a lantern. The golden light reflected in her eyes. You sound more like him every day, she said with a quiet smile. Samuel glanced up at the sky, the stars beginning to appear one by one. He'd laugh if he heard that, he said, chuckling. He never thought anyone would look up to him. He just did what had to be done. Mary nodded, her voice tender. That's what heroes do, Sam. They don't call themselves heroes, they just stand where no one else will. The night deepened and the ranch settled under a sky filled with stars. The children's laughter faded into soft murmurs, and the wind carried the scent of the earth after sunset. Samuel sat back in the old rocking chair Jack used to sit in, the wood creaking gently beneath him. He gazed out at the land, at the home that had once been built on blood and fear, now reborn through love and courage. He whispered into the wind, almost like a prayer, rest easy, old man. We're doing fine. You gave us more than a home, you gave us a purpose. A gust of wind swept across the porch, rustling the curtains, almost as if in answer. Mary smiled faintly, feeling it too. The lantern flickered once and for just a second, Samuel thought he saw Jack's figure standing near the barn, coat swaying, hat tilted low, eyes kind and strong as ever. He blinked, and the image was gone, replaced by the night. But he didn't need to see him to know. Jack was still there, in the land, in the wind, in the hearts of the 2 children he'd once saved. His spirit lived on in every act of kindness that took root on that ranch, in every child who found safety there, in every voice that whispered those same immortal words whenever fear came knocking. All of you stay behind me. And as the stars burned quietly over Montana, Samuel leaned back, closed his eyes and let the peace of that truth settle deep within him. The story had come full circle, from fear to faith, from loneliness to family, from one man's courage to an entire generation's hope. Kichiar 6 years slipped quietly into decades. The ranch that once stood as a battleground of fear and courage had now become a haven of hope, a place where every broken story found its healing. The Randall Ranch, once a lonely patch of earth, had grown into something far greater, a home, a refuge, and a legacy that reached far beyond its fences. The Randall Home for Orphaned Children was no longer a small house on the edge of the field. It was now a thriving sanctuary that echoed with laughter, learning, and the spirit of the man who had started it all. Samuel Randall, his hair now streaked with gray, stood on the porch one golden afternoon, watching the children play. Their laughter rang through the wind like music. Some chased each other near the barn, others worked with the horses under Mary's watchful eye. The field stretched green and alive, and the air was filled with the scent of wildflowers and hay. The smell of life continuing. Samuel leaned on his cane, his old hands rough but steady, and smiled. This was what Jack had fought for. This was what every scar and every sleepless night had been worth. Mary joined him on the porch, her face soft with the wisdom of years. They remind me of us, she said, nodding toward a little boy helping a smaller girl tie her shoes. You used to do that for me. Every time I fell you picked me up. Samuel chuckled. And Jack picked both of us up when we didn't even know how to stand. He gazed out at the horizon, eyes shimmering with memory. He used to say the world doesn't need perfect people. It needs people who don't walk away. Mary smiled, and he never did. The sun sank low, casting long golden shadows across the ranch. The sky blazed orange and pink, the same way it had all those years ago when they first met him. The wind carried a faint echo of the past. Gunfire, fear, the voice of a man shouting, "All of you stay behind me." Samuel could almost hear it still, not as a cry of battle, but as a promise that had carried through generations. As evening deepened, the children gathered for supper in the big hall. The long table built from the old barn wood was filled with plates of food and laughter. Samuel sat at the head, with Mary beside him. A new generation surrounded them. Some children from distant towns, others left behind by hard times, but all of them found safety here. Before eating, Samuel always spoke the same few words, words Jack had once lived by. "Every one of you has a purpose," he said gently, looking into their young faces. "Someday, someone smaller, weaker, or more scared than you will need your help. And when that day comes, remember, you don't turn away, you stand tall. You say, 'Stay behind me.' That's how we make the world better. One act of courage at a time." The children nodded, some not fully understanding yet, but feeling the weight of his words. The meal began, laughter filling the hall again, echoing through the walls like a song of life. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Samuel sat by the fire in his old rocking chair. The flames danced before him, warm and steady, and the shadows on the wall looked almost like the past come alive. Jack standing strong, rifle in hand, the children hiding behind his coat. Samuel smiled softly. He took a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "You did it, Jack. You saved more lives than you ever knew." A faint wind slipped through the cracks of the window, curling around him like a gentle embrace. For a moment it felt like someone was standing behind him again. Not as a ghost, but as a guardian. Samuel closed his eyes, letting the peace of it sink deep into his bones. The firelight flickered across his weathered face, and for the first time in many years he felt truly ready to rest. By morning Mary found him still in his chair, the fire burned low, a faint smile on his lips. He was gone, quietly, peacefully, as if he had simply followed the voice of the man who had once saved him. Beside him lay a small folded note written in Samuel's familiar hand. She opened it with trembling fingers. "If you're reading this, Mary, don't cry. The ranch is in good hands, yours and the children's. Jack once stood for us. Now it's our turn to stand for others. Tell the kids that courage never dies. It just passes on, from one heart to the next. And when you hear the wind through the fields, that's him. That's us. Still watching. Still saying the same words, 'All of you stay behind me.'" Tears streamed down Mary's cheeks as she folded the letter and looked out the window. The morning sun had risen over the hills, painting the ranch in gold. She could hear the children waking, their voices bright and full of life. The legacy would go on, stronger than ever. Years later, people still came from miles around to visit the Randall home. They would see a statue near the front gate. 3 figures cast in bronze, a rancher standing tall, a rifle in one hand, and 2 children behind him holding onto his coat. On the base, the words were simple but eternal. "All of you stay behind me." A promise that never fades. And every time the wind swept through the valley, bending the wheat and stirring the dust, it carried with it a whisper, not of fear, but of faith. A whisper that reminded every soul who heard it that courage, love, and sacrifice never truly die. They live on in those who choose to stand when the world falls quiet.